Hey everybody, welcome to the Abstrakt Podkast. My name is Greg Reffner, CEO and founder of Abstrakt, and today we have Jeremey Donovan, SVP of Revenue Strategy at SalesLoft. Jeremy, please say hi, sir.
Hey, Greg. Hey, Claire. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Been a huge fan of all the content you've been putting out over the past couple of years. Really exciting time to be in the kind of the revenue strategy, revenue operations world. And a lot of what you're putting out there, I think, is thought-provoking and insightful for companies looking to really formalize their revenue and go-to-market strategies. So some of the things that we're going to dive into today, I think, are really relevant and timely. To give our listeners a little bit of a background and some foundation for your insights and maybe some of your thoughts around things, I want to start with kind of your background. So you started at Gartner, and then AMA, GLG, CB Insights. Looking back at kind of the stepping stones of your career, in a lot of ways, I feel like laid the foundation for what you do at SalesLoft today. Have you ever kind of looking back, hindsight, and gone like, okay, all these pieces lined up? And do you ever lean on any of those prior experiences to drive some of your decisions at SalesLoft?
Yeah, for sure the pieces line up, and for sure they are informing what I do today. I now have forgotten whether it was intentional or not intentional, so I just say it was not intentional. But my career strategy, generally, I think there are careers that are very linear, right? You're an SDR, you're an AE, you're a manager, you work your way up to CRO.
Yeah.
Then this path that I took is I refer to it as add a word, drop a word. So I actually started in a semiconductor company called Xilinx, and I was a semiconductor engineer. And then I dropped that when I joined Gartner, and I one word, the engineer part, it became a semiconductor analyst. And then throughout my career, I was sort of adding words and dropping words as I picked up ultimately product development, product management, product marketing, corporate marketing, then into sales. I was a CRO briefly. And then I found that I loved sales/revenue operations. So there was a method to the madness, but I can't tell you whether that was intentional or not. I feel like it was intentional. And then in terms of how those things inform what I do today, I was an engineer, obviously way back when. And I've generally pursued things where I could apply a fact-based, quantitative, analytical, and consultative bent to domains that didn't have those as characteristics. So for me, that was true of marketing many years ago, which is what drew me into marketing. And then, sales was more art than science for a long time. And what drew me into sales was there's still problems to be solved that I find intellectually very, very interesting. If I were to do I used to think if I had one more switch in me, although I don't think I have that switch in me anymore, is to go into HR, and because there's another area where it was more art than science, but I think that one's becoming more science too, and that was really pioneered probably by many people, but I credit Laszlo Bock, who was the head of HR. He was ex-McKinsey and then head of HR at Google. Okay. And he really brought sort of scientific processes and consultative processes into the HR world. I'm sure there were others before him that I'm not giving appropriate credit to. But anyway, that long-winded answer, but yes, method to the madness. And yes, I do use, I still code, I still use statistics, all those things I still apply to my job.
I love that. As you were talking about that, it reminds me of Steve Jobs' Stanford commencement speech, where he talks about kind of the breadcrumbs and looking back, kind of all the pieces are kind of tied together in one way or another. So your kind of just analysis of your history really reminded me of that speech he gave. And yeah, it sounds like you ultimately came to the end goal there.
I'm flattered. No one has ever compared me to Steve Jobs. I did love that speech. I'm a big reader. We can talk a lot about books probably as well. And the Jobs bio is definitely one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time. I'm actually reading, I didn't know there was one, but there's a Tim Cook bio right now floating around. So that's the book I'm at. I read fiction and nonfiction simultaneously, but that's the nonfiction book I'm reading like as we speak. It's not as good as the Jobs bio. It's a good overview of Apple, but I want more about Tim Cook. It's not giving me enough about Tim Cook, and that's what I'm after.
Do you ever, we're going to go off on a little tangent here, just out of pure curiosity. Do you ever kind of wonder, like, this myth of Steve Jobs, the persona, the stigma, do you wonder if like people would be as intrigued by who he was and who he like the way his brain worked if he was still alive today?
I I do think so. I say that because people were intrigued before. Like let's let's abstract that to people who are alive. Bill Gates, right? Like I think there's still a fascination about Bill Gates, not just who he is today, but I'm actually really fascinated by who Bill Gates was when he was at Microsoft, which I don't think like he was well known to be very intense, not in the Steve Jobs way, but I don't think there's enough about him when he was at Microsoft. And then obviously people are intensely fascinated by Elon Musk, right?
Yeah.
So I would just draw a parallel between Jobs and Musk perhaps as like two very unusual people that, and I think we're just drawn to like, what's the personality of the wealthiest person on the planet? Jeff Bezos, probably the same thing applies.
That's true. Yeah, that's a valid point.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, let's get back on topic. So about a month ago, 5 weeks ago, you ran a poll on LinkedIn, and this is really going to kind of serve the foundation for our conversation. It had just under 3,500 votes. And it was, what is the number one reason new sales reps hit quota? Rep skill and ability was number one with 32%. Training and enablement ranked 30%. Territory ranked 24%. Were these results surprising to you, Jeremy?
A little surprising, because I actually would have thought the territories that they were assigned to would have been number one. And I say that also from some degree of experiences. As I've gone into different companies and worked in revenue strategy and ops, it's like the first thing I look at is I'm looking at rep attainment, rep performance, and I slice and dice that by, were they an internal promotion or were they hired from the outside? When did they join? And what I've seen in a lot of early stage companies is you sort of, in the first wave, you hire somebody very early, right? Like seed stage, you hire a bunch of people and you just say, go, right? Like,
yep.
Grab what you can as fast as you can. And that's the right thing to do. You don't need to impose a lot of discipline in typically in those early stages, unless you have a really, really hyper targeted like enterprise solution that only has 20 customers on the planet, right? I mean, those things exist, but it's generally not the norm. And then the next stage is, okay, we've hired a bunch of people, we're going to cap the territory at, you can hold 100, and you lose an account if you are not sufficiently active, however that's defined. And that's often the stage where I have come into companies, and the kind of one of the reasons I get hired is that's not working. They don't know why, but something's not working. And very, very often it's like a play that I would run almost everywhere I've gone, which is to build a true equal potential territory model and assign accounts out to AEs so that they're not picking them for themselves anymore. So yeah, with respect to that poll, I was a bit surprised. I mean, if you think about, right, sort of the behavioral reason why the answer was rep skill and ability, of course, reps are answering and they want to believe it's that they have control over their attainment through skill and ability. And I'm not denying that skill and ability isn't important. I just think, territory is probably of equal importance.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue that, if you're getting, let's say, Northern California versus maybe South Dakota,
yeah,
right? And you're in B2B software sales, there's some level of expectation of success that's just inherent in your territory if you're given one area as opposed to a different one.
For sure. And like you solve that by, right, if you have 3 reps, right, let's say you had just 3 reps, you're not going to give one East Coast, one Central, and one West. That's madness. You probably, if you were in enterprise or if you were in SaaS, you might stick all 3 of them in the West Coast, right?
Yeah.
And you'd sort of do that for a while, and then you'll put a few on the East Coast, and then eventually you'll put one for the entire swath of the Midwest of the US, right? So you build that up, and that's what I'm getting at, is like equal potential territories. We have an internal model that we've developed that that determines for every single account, what do we think the in the economics world expectation value of that account is. and it's three things multiplied together. It's the probability that we will get an op in that account based on firmographics, based on first and third party intent, based on history that we've had with the contacts at that particular account. So that probability we'll get an op, that's the most sophisticated factor. And then we multiply that times our expected win rate if we have an op, and then what our average contract value is if we win. So from that, you get an expectation value, and then you can basically add those together to build territories for people that are, as I said, equal potential, because that potential should exceed their should equal or exceed their quota. Otherwise, you got a problem.
Yeah,
right? They're not going to meet their quota.
I love how sophisticated that is. And so, kind of analyzing your answer, it definitely makes sense why you would have thought territory would have been number one based upon the analysis and the time and attention SalesLoft has placed into kind of formulating this model around building territories, and how I would assume it's a relatively predictable model that you guys have put together, where there's a certain level of expected success with that model, right?
It is, yeah. There's a few things I track on this. One is, my goal, our goal is to have 2/3 of, this is sort of conventional metric, but 2/3 of reps should meet or exceed quota during the year. And there is more math behind why that 2/3 is a magic number. It's because if that happens, then because of the people who exceed, you will meet or exceed your total revenue goal for the company.
Yep.
So like that's another thing we're sort of tracking. And then with respect to predictability, absolutely, our goal is the conventional industry one, although with a finer point on it, which is when we forecast, we're trying to make sure that we're within plus or minus 5% of the final number based on the number we call on day 15 of the quarter. And it's day 15 because we do 2 weeks of QBRs, internal QBRs, to basically clean up the ops.
Yeah, clean up pipeline.
Clean the pipeline, and then so we look at day 15, we look at day 90, and we're expected to be within plus or minus 5%, and we're routinely within plus or minus 3%. So, like, it is the sophistication of the territory model. It's also the sophistication, obviously, of our approach to forecasting.
I love that. I'm sure we could spend all day on that topic alone, and that's awesome. So, I mean, plus or minus 3%, and you call that number 15 days into a 90
quarter.
Into the quarter.
90 day, yep.
That's phenomenal. And I mean, there's proofs in the pudding why Vista just took a majority stake in sales, because those numbers are there, right? And numbers don't lie. So that's awesome. Well, let's back it up a little bit and let's get into kind of the number one answer, right? Rep skill and ability. When I think of skill and ability, I think of some things that are either innately you're born with, whether that be athletic ability, a certain level of intelligence. Skill is something that can be crafted over time. It's something that's practiced and practiced and practiced. And so I was kind of puzzled with this because I was thinking about it. And if we just assume for argument's sake that skill and ability is something that is not something that's picked up in one day, new reps need to have success earlier rather than later. Training takes time. New reps don't have time. There seems to be a disconnect there. Am I overthinking that too much?
I would quibble a little bit with how much you're born with. I don't think you're born with that much, but that's a whole separate thing. But to your point about, like, yeah, when reps are hired, they are expected to hit the ground running. I do feel that ramp times are unrealistic for almost every position in sales, from SDR all the way through enterprise sales executive. I think the larger enterprise, like big enterprise companies, Oracle, SAP, Microsoft, Salesforce, I actually think they're relatively realistic about ramp times because I think they've run the data. Like, I know if you get hired at Oracle, it is, like, you're almost in an apprentice program for a year or two. And oftentimes, right during that time, you're not on a 50-50 comp plan that goes live in 90 days,
90 days,
like
yeah.
it's not, they know it's not realistic. You often have a non-recoverable draw for, 12, at least 12 months, if not more. So I do think there's an unrealistic ramp time. And then with respect to, skill building, this is one thing I do a lot of is I pull profiles of people, hundreds, if not thousands of people off of LinkedIn, and then I'll crunch the data sometimes myself, or I'll ship it off for crunching to Upwork contractors. And I try to figure out, like, is there any bio data that's predictive of whether or not somebody will be successful in a role? So this is what the last one I did was actually enterprise AEs.
Okay.
And I had I had some hypotheses that were confirmed, some that I was surprised that were not correct. So the two that I felt strongly about that I was wrong about is I felt like you should only hire enterprise reps who had been at least 2 years of tenure in their immediate prior role. I thought that was really important as a like past success predicting future success. And that one, at least in the pretty decent amount, I think I pulled like 500 profiles and I run the stats on it. That one's still not statistically significantly different. So that was a shock to me. And it's changed my mind, about like how I would hire people. So that, in a way, that kind of gets at your thing about skill, is like, they can attain, they do come in with skill, even if they have less tenure, and they can learn. And the things they need to learn, like if you think about an enterprise rep, like the things they need to learn is they need to actually learn, I think, at least 3 big things. Obviously the product.
Yep.
But almost as important is they also need to learn they're managing a team, right? Like they need to learn who are the right people on their team to assemble to do the deal, especially in an enterprise deal. And then the third thing is like all the logistics and processes for getting deals done in their organization, right? Like how to get through CPQ and all that sort of thing. I guess if you threw a fourth thing in, well, I talked about the product already. So that's probably good.
That's fair. So you mentioned one of the things, kind of your expectation around previous success being an indicator of future success. What was the other surprise?
The other one was related. It was actually that I thought if they had evidence in their immediate prior job of President's Club or Winner's Circle or whatever people call it, that would also be predictive, and that was not statistically predictive of success. The biggest thing that was, those are 2 things that weren't. The biggest thing that was predictive of success is simply that they were promoted internally. Okay. From like an SMB rep into an enterprise rep, and we've seen I've seen that everywhere I've been. I see it at SalesLoft. It's not that we don't have people come in from the outside. You're talking about I forget the exact numbers, but let's say 45% success rate versus a 55, or a 40 versus 60. So it's not that people who come in from the outside can't be successful. It's that, let's say 4 out of 10 of them are, versus 6 out of 10 internal promotions. So that's that. So when if you just a small number of reps or whatever, like, may not make a big difference. But if you're hiring tens, if not hundreds or even thousands in the case of large enterprises of reps, that's a big performance.
That's a huge 10% of $100 million is $10 million.
Yeah. So like then you actually want to make sure that you've got that internal promotion engine like really, really finely tuned in your capacity planning in a very sophisticated way.
It's interesting. So my analysis of what makes a rep successful is not nearly as sophisticated as yours is. I kind of have some sticky notes written down on my desk, but ultimately one of the things that I've kind of thought through my career is success at an SDR level. Like in order to be successful as an SDR, like you had to have some level of previous success in some type of SDR role. And I've kind of fought that because every successful SDR I've known, their background came from knocking on doors, like house to house, knife selling, internet selling, Cutco, basically building up confidence and this like suppressing fear of rejection. And I found that was a very good indicator of early success at like an SDR level. So
I've studied that one too.
Okay.
With like 2,000, I know that one was 2,000 profiles we looked at. And yeah, the number one profile for hiring an SDR is actually someone who spent 2 years at a recruiting agency. That's
okay.
Number one most successful profile. And you're spot on. Prior SDRs have a much lower success rate as SDRs. There's a few other profiles that are not successful, or again, some are, but are statistically less successful when they get to SDRs. But that to me is the killer profile.
Yeah, recruiters. I mean, that's another job where you face rejection 99% of the time, and you just have to learn to pick up the phone and keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oracle did. I've just talked about Oracle a couple of times. Not that they're like the world's greatest company, right? Although they have survived the on-prem to cloud. It's rocky, but right, they've survived that transition. But
yeah.
The reason I cite them is I had the great privilege to sit in a sort of more intimate setting with their former CEO who passed shortly after that, Mark Hurd, and he was describing their approach to hiring, and like they had gone through all this data. And one thing that he revealed that I have not tested, but again, I sort of trust the data from them on this, is when they looked at people's college backgrounds, because especially for new college hires, right? Because they do a lot of that because they are doing that progressive thing. It wasn't like that they were an athlete or they were a this or they were a that. What they found was people who had a diversity of extracurricular activities. So like if you were, you played volleyball and you were in the a cappella group, right? Like if you had this diverse set of experiences, then those people, prove to be more successful. I think, right, like why is that? I think it's probably a proxy for curiosity. It's probably a proxy for conscientiousness, might be a proxy for IQ. And all the academic studies that are on job performance, whether it's sales or elsewhere, say that it's basically three things. It's IQ, conscientiousness, and job skill. So, that's all. Those are the things to test.
So it's so fascinating that you said curiosity was the first thing that you listed, because that's immediately where my mind went, where if you're dabbling or kind of exposing yourself to different things, it's because you're naturally curious about the world around you. And I think of Mark Roberge's book that he wrote. What was it called?
Sales machine or something with machine in it. Yeah. Sales acceleration
formula.
Maybe.
Yep. And so something he listed as coachability and like a natural curiosity is, I think, the top two traits of successful sales reps. And so I think that's, again, like Oracle sees it. And I love the parallel you drew there with the natural curiosity, exposing yourself to different things. I got kicked out of college and I had no extracurricular activities, so I would have been an outlier in that study.
and there are, right? Is that the point? Is often what we're talking about is like, again, 40% success versus 60% success. So like, can you find people who didn't go to college who were enormously successful? Absolutely. Can you find people who were, who quit college and were enormously successful? Absolutely. The point is large numbers. Like if you look whatever at, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, people, when you're talking about millions of people, right? Like you're better off going to college than not going to college. You're better off getting a grad degree than not getting a grad degree. Like education is correlated with, success. But not once you get into, the law of small numbers, right? That's different. And then you can put asterisks on things like, I think Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of Harvard, but it's hard. Like the hard part is getting in, right? It's not to say that completing is not important also, but right is these are people with core intelligence to begin with. I did want to make a quick comment on like, because you mentioned sort of the born with. I do think a lot about, I think about 7 dimensions of success, but let's just take financial success for a second. I do think so much of it is like 3 things. It is yes, hard work, yes, um, things, that you were given, and I'll come back to that. And then the third one's luck. It is all three have to play. I think people often who are quote unquote successful think it was like all them, and they fail to recognize how much circumstances played, either luck or like, or gender, ethnicity, right? Economic, birth, all these things that you have no
control over.
You have no control over.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Jordan Peterson, he's a psychologist, I think he is. Yeah. And he talks about, one of his podcasts, he talks about how everybody in Silicon Valley thinks that they're just this amazing, person, self-made. And he kind of dives into, he's like, yes, maybe you worked hard, but you're also surrounded by amazingly successful people in an environment that breeds success, and there's just so many other things outside of what you can control that ultimately have a factor in your success. And I think it's always interesting that, because yes, you need to work hard, but you also need a tremendous amount of luck along the way, and things have to go right.
For sure. Yeah. Like I don't miss the fact that I'm a 6'5" Caucasian, whose mom was a teacher, and, like all these things that I was gifted.
Yes.
In birth.
Yep. Yeah.
For sure.
And it's a gift, I think, is the appropriate word to use there, because it's something that we should be thankful for. So on that note, let's kind of polish this up with a couple of things. So we've kind of hit on like ramp time, Jeremy, and I 1000% agree. I think ramp time is just, so it just sets people up for success and places unnecessary pressure on a situation that's already kind of stressful. And so when I think back to my time as an SDR, as an account executive, to my colleagues that have gone through this process, so much of sales training and onboarding is kind of rinse and repeat. It's like the same bad habits over and over and over again. And so without giving away any kind of secret sauce, what does SalesLoft do differently to set reps up for success throughout onboarding, through training, and really make sure that like 2/3 of your reps are hitting their quota, along with certain reps over exceeding their quota? Because industry stats put it, less than 50% of reps are hitting their quota. So what do you guys do differently?
I would love to claim that we do something radically differently than the rest of the SaaS industry, but we really don't. I mean, I think it comes down to, right, is like this maniacal attention to hiring, for sure, both in the selection of people, and attention to diversity, and the way that the very hyper, like even for us, when I joined 4 years ago, like even for a small company, we were so hyper structured in the interviewing process. So I think of it as selection as opposed to interviewing. It's just a subtlety in terminology, but I think it's an important terminology that we're selecting people for the company, and we reject. I think one time I saw some stat that like it was harder to get a job at SalesLoft than it was to get into Harvard. Like, oh, wow. we reject so many candidates. So that's one piece. And then once they get on board, I mean, again, sort of the circumstance matters, right? Is the product, I was a customer for years before I joined. And so like, it's not, no product sells itself. Maybe Zoom during the pandemic sells itself, but few products sell themselves, but solid product. And then like we have over invested throughout. I don't run enablement, or nor have I run enablement at SalesLoft, but we have over invested in enablement throughout our existence, because we just believe in it. So there's a ton of like attention given to selling skills. But again, I think that's true of other SaaS companies, role playing, learning the product, learning the people, and like how deals get done. We invest a ton in sales tech, as you'd imagine. Like we have so many tools for people to use, and those things are hopefully additive to them.
Yeah.
If I'm trying to channel, like if Kyle, our CEO, were answering this question, I think that his answer would actually be the culture of the company. That if you hire people and you create an environment of collegiality, of warmth, he would use the word love. Although I sometimes go back and forth on whether that is a little Silicon Valley, the TV show, or not, or Silicon Valley, the real Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, I do think that, what is it? Happy employees make for happy customers.
Yep.
I like, if there's a secret, that's probably it. And it's really, I'm 48. I haven't worked at a ton of companies in my life, but I've worked at enough, and this is a truly special place.
That's awesome. Well, I think
best place I've ever worked.
Peter Schultz said, hire for character, train for skill, right? And if you hire the right character, you hire the right attitude, the rest kind of takes care of itself in a lot of ways. And it forms the foundation.
Get that. I'll say, like, you mostly get that right. What another thing from experience, two more things, is like, why is our culture distinct? And the thing I learned, and I only learned it at SalesLoft, it's obvious in hindsight, is that culture comes from the top. So every company basically has the same core values. They just different wording.
Yeah.
What is different about SalesLoft is Kyle and Rob, our co-founders, like, walk the walk every day on those values, and they hold themselves publicly accountable if they deviate. And that's something I've never ever seen before. So I think there was a second one but I'm having a senior moment right now. But that, like, to me, it may come back to me in our recording time or not. But like, that really is the defining thing about successful culture in companies, is how the CEOs operate. Like, I once worked for a company where the CEO built himself like a separate wing in the office with a locked door, and a TV and a bathroom, and whatever. Like, it just was really weird. I left that company.
I can't imagine many people stayed.
No, unfortunately they didn't, and the culture was broken. So
yeah, that's awesome. I often think about, Abstrakt's not going to have an office anytime soon, but I often think about, like, if we had an office, like, put me out in the open office floor plan, like, put me on a desk right next to an SDR. Like, that's where I want to be. And I think you need to be willing to step up and show people you're willing to walk the walk, not just talk the talk, and
for sure
kind of stand behind a PowerPoint presentation or a company-wide email sometimes. So, well, Jeremey, we went way over our planned time, but this was awesome. I took away some big things. I loved kind of your territory model and predictability model, which again lends itself to why you thought that would be the poll you ran might be a little bit different in terms of the outcome. Kind of the indicators of success and the different metrics you have in terms of hiring and what you're looking for, learning product, team management, logistics, how to move deals. I think there's so many takeaways. I'm kind of having a hard time wrapping my head around the three most important ones that I want to take away, other than I loved our time together, man. And this was very insightful. I'm super excited for our listeners to get their hands on this. And thank you for your time. If anybody wants to get hold of you, get in touch with you, learn more about SalesLoft, what's the best way to do that, Jeremey?
I'm sure the same answer you always get: LinkedIn. So yeah, just connect with me on LinkedIn. I post a little, fact-based, analytical, actionable tidbit almost every day. So hopefully the people find those valuable, but that's the best way.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day, Jeremey.
Thanks. It was a blast.